beautiful garden, the garden of prayer. Oh, the beautiful garden of prayer. There my Savior awaits, and He opens the gates to the beautiful garden of prayer. Be seated. We turn this morning to the book of Exodus. It's a rather lengthy passage, but without reading the whole thing, I don't think we'd be able to get the gist of the story. So we'll read Exodus chapter 1, beginning at verse 7, and we'll read through the 10th verse of the 2nd chapter. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are more vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. I remember when I saw the image. He was a cute little 3-year-old boy. Could have been a part of any of our families. He was wearing a bright red shirt, navy blue shorts, and shoes. His name was Alan, but you never met him. I'm confident you know of him, though, and you know his story. His picture gained worldwide attention when it was published in every newspaper and was downloaded multiple times on social media. It was the picture of this little boy lying face down on the coast of Turkey near the resort of Bodrum. He drowned when the boat that he and his family were in capsized somewhere between Syria and Greece. He was one of the Syrian refugees. His 5-year-old brother drowned too. Remember seeing the image? I remember seeing the picture. The first time I came across it was on MSNBC. And I remember it because Rachel Maddow got so upset she started crying and they had to cut away to Lawrence O'Donnell early. And I remember sitting there looking at that scene on TV thinking, what kind of a world are we living in where this is happening to our children? Children washing up on a shore of some country. Gruesome, heartless, cruel. And I wonder if you had been walking along the Nile River when our passage took place, how many young little boys you would have seen washed up on the Nile River. It's one of the most gruesome passages in all of the Old Testament. It's a horrible story. What can we make out of it? Let me set the scene for you. There were 3 patriarchs of Israel: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This passage has to deal with Jacob's family. When Jacob was about to die, Jacob was about 17 years away from death, his family moved down to Egypt for a couple of reasons. First of all, there was a horrible famine. There was Egypt down there, and they had grain. If Jacob's family were to survive this famine, they had to go. Also, one of Jacob's sons lived in Egypt. You say, well, why did one of Jacob's sons live in Egypt? Well, you might remember the story. Jacob had a favorite child. It wasn't the firstborn, but it was the firstborn by his favorite wife. So he showed favoritism to this young man. He even bought him a special gift. Anybody remember what that special gift was? A coat of many colors. And his name was Joseph. And I can just imagine Joseph out in the field wearing that coat of many colors. And every time his brothers see him wearing that coat of many colors, they're out there working. And here he is prancing around in some coat of many colors. And finally they had it. They said, we're going to kill him. But one of the brothers, anybody remember which one? Reuben. Said, no, let's don't kill him. Let's just sell him. So there were some, for lack of a better term, gypsies coming through. And they sold their youngest brother. Well, the gypsies made it down to Egypt. When they got to Egypt, they sold Joseph as well to an Egyptian official. You've done so good so far. What was his name? What? Potiphar. Right. And Potiphar was very impressed with Joseph. So Joseph worked his way up the ranks in the nation of Egypt, had some dreams, interpreted some dreams, and finally, when the famine come, he was placed in charge of distributing the grain. One day he looks out at the people at the line who have come begging for grain, and there are those rascals who sold him. If I'd have been Joseph, they wouldn't have gotten any grain. But Joseph forgave them. Joseph gave them the grain they needed, and Joseph invited them to come and live there with him in Egypt. So Jacob and all of his family, all the rest of these brothers and their children, come down, move into Egypt. They're treated like royalty because Pharaoh loved Joseph, because through the interpretation of the dreams, Egypt had been spared. Everything goes great. Then another Pharaoh comes on the scene. A Pharaoh who cared nothing for Joseph. A Pharaoh who didn't invite Joseph into his inner circle. And this Pharaoh looks out and he sees all of these Israelites down here living among his people. And he thinks to himself, there's just too many of them. If war breaks out, if a neighboring enemy tries to attack us, these Israelites, they might join them. They might help them overtake us. They might leave the country. We have got to do something about these Israelites. So the Pharaoh calls his people together. Says, now we're going to work these people, and we're going to work these people hard. We are going to enslave them. We are going to make them build these cities. We are going to make their life miserable. I can see Denzel, he's thinking, I must have married an Egyptian. Moving on. Done forgot where I was now. So the Egyptians are enslaving the Israelites. But the more they enslave them, the more they multiply. It's like nothing the Pharaoh can do can stop these people. So he says, all right, he calls for the midwives. He says, when you go to deliver one of the Israelite children, if it's a boy, I want you to kill it. If it's a girl, let her live. Well, that doesn't happen. The midwives just could not bring themselves to do it. They feared God, the text says. So the little boys are living. Pharaoh sees that it's not happening. He calls for them. The midwives, and this is one part of the passage I can't explain. I don't understand why the midwives didn't say, well, we just feared God and we didn't do it. The midwives say, well, these Israelite women, they had the babies before we get there. And even with them saying that, God still blesses them. The Pharaoh says, all right, that didn't work. I've got some more plans up my sleeve. Any one of you, any Egyptian, if you see a Hebrew baby, you throw that baby in the Nile River. Well, someone in the tribe of Levi marries a Levite woman. Before too long, she is with child. When she gives birth, she sees this little baby boy, and there is no way she's going to let anybody get their hands on her little baby. She hides him for 3 months. I don't know how she did it. How are you going to hide a screaming, crying baby for 3 months? She did. And finally she realizes, I can't do this anymore. So with tears streaming down her face, she fastens together. She takes some reeds, puts tar all around it, and she makes a little boat. Puts her baby in this boat, praying the whole time, I have a feeling. Goes down to the Nile River, and I think she waits. Because I think she had been watching all along. And she knew that Pharaoh's daughter probably came down to bathe at a certain time every day. When the entourage comes with Pharaoh's daughter, she puts him in the water. And I think she may have even given that little boat a little push. The sister is down there watching, babysitting, so to speak. And Pharaoh's daughter's in the Nile. She's taking her bath. All her attendants are walking along the riverbank, security. And she probably hears something before she sees something. And she says, what's that over there? They bring this little boat to her. She looks in it, and there lays the baby. It's not been named yet. We all know what it's going to be named, but it hasn't been named yet. And she looks into that little face. He's crying. And she has a moment where her heart is touched. She says, I'm going to name you Moses because I found you among the reeds and I got you out of the water. Well, the sister has been watching all along. And the sister comes up and says, would you like for me to go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse that baby for you? And Pharaoh's daughter says, I think I do. So the sister goes and gets Moses' mother. She nurses that baby. She cares for it. And then Moses becomes one of Pharaoh's daughter's children. When I read this text, it's gruesome. It's interesting, but several questions come to mind. You see, I understand why the midwives couldn't kill the babies. I understand why the regular Egyptians could not throw the babies into the Nile. But this is Pharaoh's daughter. I wonder what it was about her. Why did she save Moses' life? After all, she was subject to her father's ruling just like everybody else. Why did she defy her father's order? Maybe it was because when she saw a face and saw a person and realized that the stories she had been hearing actually made a difference to people's lives, when she put a face and a name with an event, it made it seem more real to her. Maybe she hadn't given much thought to what her father's decision meant for the Hebrew women. Perhaps she didn't know any of them personally. And then she looks at this baby lying so helplessly in a crudely crafted basket, floating down the Nile. And I think it really hit her hard. She probably thought of just how hard it was for this baby's mother to take this kind of faith that her baby would be okay. And maybe she wonders, did her father, the king of Egypt, think about the heartache and the havoc that this horrendous decision would have caused? Did he know about the pain the Hebrews, the Israelites, were feeling? Did he care? I don't know if she did before this incident, but I do know when she looked in Moses' face, suddenly she cared. And suddenly she thought, I have got to do something about this situation. She may have said to herself, I am only one person, and I can't solve every problem, but I can do something about this problem. I am only one, but I am going to be the one who does something about injustice and cruelty and hatred when I see it. I may not can change everything, but I can change something. Charles Dickens was right. We are living in the best of times. Can you finish it? And the worst of times. Our world today is just as bad as the world in which Moses was born. We see hatred. We see havoc. We see injustice. We read stories where people pull guns on each other over a face mask. We read stories where people get in fights and fist fights and gun fights and knife fights over a parking space. We are living in a world that is full of hatred, havoc, and we might not can change everything, but we can decide we will do something. And there is something each of us can do to change the world. So many times people ask, I'm just one person. Can I really make a difference? Yes. Yes, you can. I read this story. I look at the background of this story, and I see so many people who made one choice to change something. And God took those choices and God weaved those choices together. And it not only changed the life of Moses, it changed the life of the entire Hebrew nation, and it ultimately changed the world. So we've got to ask ourselves this morning, and if this passage does anything, it asks us to ask the question, will you be one who builds up, or will you be one who tears down? Will you be honest and trustworthy, or will you be deceptive and conniving? Will you be generous, or will you be greedy? Will you be kind, or will you be rude? Will you be compassionate, or will you be indifferent? Will you be humble, or will you be arrogant? Will you be inclusive, or will you be exclusive? Will you forgive, or will you take revenge? This story has been preserved, I think, primarily to tell us that one person can make a difference. And the thread which runs throughout the entire story is individuals who made decisions that, when pieced together, changed the world. Will you be one of those people? Reuben was. Reuben persuaded his brothers not to kill Joseph. That made it possible for Joseph to end up in Egypt. Joseph decided he was not going to roll in pity. He was not going to waste his life away, but he was going to make the most of a bad situation. Pharaoh, the Pharaoh that was in charge of Egypt at the time of Joseph's arrival, he saw potential in this young man. He didn't let the difference in their race keep him from befriending him. Joseph, when he had the opportunity to get back at his brothers, chose to forgive, invited them to Egypt. When the new king came upon the scene, the midwives said, "We are not going to kill these little boys. We can't do it." And they saved their lives. Moses' mother, she took a chance by placing her 3-month-old baby in a basket filled only with tears and prayers. Pharaoh's daughter listened to her heart and provided a safe haven for a baby marked for death. Everywhere you look in this story, you see the difference one person made in confronting challenges and changing the course of history. Will you be one of those people? People say, why can't the world be different? It can if you'll step up and do something about it. You can't fix everything, but you can fix something. I heard the story. The story of an old man walking down the beach. There'd been a bad storm the night before. And the beach was just littered with starfish. The starfish were dying. They needed the water. But because of that storm, they had washed up and they just couldn't get back to the water. One by one, the old man was walking down the beach. He'd pick up a starfish. He'd toss it back in the ocean. He'd go a little bit farther. He'd bend down again. He'd pick up another starfish. He'd throw it back into the ocean. There were some people watching him. They said, "Oh man, look at all these starfish. There is no way you can even put a dent in the depths. You can't make a bit of difference." When the old man heard that, he bent down, picked up another starfish, threw it into the ocean. He said, "I made a difference in that one's life." And he went on, and one by one, he made a difference. You might not can change everything, but you can be one of the ones who stand up and say, "I'm going to change something." You can't do everything, but you can do something. Who is the Moses in your life that needs your help this week? Don't let the bad news in our country and around the world overwhelm you and paralyze you. You may not be able to rescue every person in harm's way, but you can make a difference in someone around you whose life is in peril. It may be a family member. It may be a schoolmate. It may be a coworker, a friend, a neighbor, or even a stranger God sends your way. Be ready. Don't make excuses. Listen to your heart and do what you can. And if you'll do what you can, God will place it on someone else's heart to do what they can. And then as only God can, He will take your choice and their choice, and He will stitch them together. And that's how we'll change the world. One person at a time. One decision at a time. One day at a time. That's what the church is about. That's why God put us together in the church. Because God knew we would look at a world full of chaos and we would say it's just too much. There's just too much hurt. There's just too much evil. I can't do anything about it. So God gave us a team. God gave us a team. And everybody needs to do their part. Will you decide this week to stand up and do yours? There's a Moses out there waiting on you. Will you step up? Will you? Amen.